store, man. Got me that dang old Bud Light, brother.
All right. You didn't get a Bud Light. All right.
Somebody dang on that there boy thinks he's a man.
3, 2, 1. Give me an intro.
Hey, and welcome back to the Godfo Universe podcast. I'm Josh Adams. I'm here with Dan Evans. We are the co-creators of the Godfo Universe comics, video games, short films, novels, you name it. We're working on it.
Joe Namath.
We got a pretty cool topic tonight that I think Dan and I are both really into this topic and excited to discuss it. So, Dan, why don't you introduce the idea for tonight's conversation?
The topic tonight is
Yo mama.
anime, because a lot of or maybe I shouldn't say a lot, but like prominent right-wing dudes, commentators or whatever, have been ripping anime, and it's like a big thing on the Twitter and YouTube verse. And I don't know if they're Christians or not, but they're just like talking about how anime is either a waste of time or it's for pervs and all that kind of stuff. You know, the same stuff that comes up even when anime was like in the 90s, that people at your high school, if they saw it, would fling at you. And it's dumb. It's stupid. I can't believe that we're still having that kind of stuff, like that conversation. It's like, and we can just jump right into it, because
Yeah, sure.
First of all, like anime is it's a medium. It's a forum. It literally is just the Japanese way of saying animation. Like that's
and that's the thing is, just like any, like you can talk about books, and yes, some books are really stupid, some books are really pervy, some are really good. You know, the anime has some darker,
it's got some lame tropes, like some bad tropes.
It does, but so does everything.
Yeah. Well, it's like saying we know what YA, like the books are now. Like they're all love triangle BS crap written by really sad women. Like, so yeah, tropes exist, and like, I mean, let's be honest. Like there is some pervy stuff in anime, but that doesn't mean in general. It's just in a lot of it. But
yeah,
even here, like here's the thing, and I know our listeners can't see it, but like imagine like a small circle. Like that's the top tier anime that everybody knows about and sees, or at least popular, maybe not top tier. And then there's a wider circle that includes some of those tropes too. But then there's like a huge selection that doesn't have any of it. Like I'd probably be bold enough to say most anime doesn't have anything remotely pervy in it. It might have something like culturally different. Like it might have like glimpses of like nudity or something, but it's not meant in a perverted way. It's meant in like an illustrative, like artistic way. Because there's a ton of anime. Like people don't know. Like it's like music. There's so much music you don't know about it. There's so much anime that you don't know about it, and that's not being like an art house jerk, pretentious dude. Like, oh, they don't know about it. It's just like, no, like there's so much. There's no way you know all about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's important to us because probably, golly, more than just about any other influence, man, anime has had a huge impact on what you and I create.
Yeah, everything I create.
Like
it influences.
Yeah, literally every facet of what we create is enormously inspired by and impacted by anime. Even like to the point that like the whole idea of the Blue Bolt band, which led to the Godfo universe, was making music about an anime character.
Yeah, that I made up. It was like, hey, what's the most anime name I could come up with, which was Blue Bolt X Red Runner, and then we changed it to something else. And like, what's the most like anime concept I can come up with?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so that's a good place to start, though. It's like, what is anime, like objectively, which I think we already covered. It's just animation for Japan, or from Japan, I should say. And then what is it to us? And I mean, to me, the main thing is that it's fearless. It is what movies wish they could be, is what I would say.
Yeah. See, for me, it had, and as an artist, what drew me in to anime, no pun intended, but now what was the the biggest draw for me was that I'll give you an example. So, like, I started watching anime in the late 80s, early 90s, and, you know, it was back when it was still just called Japanimation.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you'd catch it on the Sci-Fi Channel back when we actually had a real Sci-Fi Channel. And I'd record a movie on Saturday morning, Japanimation on Saturday morning, or I'd go find we had like one store that had a couple of racks of anime VHSs in the mall, and I'd go buy some of those. But the crazy thing was, we had a couple of cartoons when I was a kid that were anime, but almost nobody realized it at the time because we didn't know what anime really.
Well, and to go off of that, people don't know that like a lot of American cartoons were worked on by Japanese animators.
I was going to get into that. I know that like Voltron was really big.
Thundercats.
It was, and RoboCop, not RoboCop, Robotech was really big.
That'd be awesome.
That would be awesome. No, Robotech was really big, and both of those were Japanese shows that just got slightly changed a little bit around and then brought to the United States with a different name, but they were completely Japanese properties that were brought over here. The same way like Godzilla and Ultraman and stuff were in the 70s and 60s. And then you also had, like for me, a lot of the animated shows that America produced, things like Thundercats, things like He-Man or G.I. Joe, Transformers and stuff, you'd watch the shows, and a lot of those shows, I know Thundercats did it, Silverhawks did this, G.I. Joe.
Man, I had the giant hawk toy from Silverhawks.
I did too. It shot the little orange missile.
It was made out of a plastic so hard it could break bones.
But those shows, they all would farm out the animation for their intro with the theme song and all that stuff. Ninja Turtles did it too. The opening theme song animation, they would hire a Japanese anime company to do that animation. Mm-hmm. And you'd be blown away by how cool it looked. And then by the time the show started, you realized the show animation quality dropped
was not as good
drastically.
As that.
And, you know, like I loved the animated shows on Fox, like X-Men and Iron Man and Spider-Man and stuff. I watched those as a kid, but they couldn't hold a candle to the level of detail and maturity in the storytelling and smoothness and all that the Japanese animated shows had. They were incredibly, incredibly well made.
Yeah.
And nothing in America didn't like all the American cartoons were phoned in, do it as quick as we can, as sloppy as we can. We just need to sell toys.
Well, that's the thing is it's a weird double-edged sword, the history of anime, because let's just talk the technical side. We'll get more into like the culture war crap soon. Because for some reason, I guess right-wing dudes just love alienating any possible audience they can have.
We infuriate today.
they gotta put out quote unquote content because they don't create anything. Anyway, yeah, it's a kind of a double-edged sword because what they figured out was that when they have a budget, they invested in their talent. These guys knew, and like if you look at those classic, and even now, like anime artists, like those guys studied art. They knew art. They started with Picasso, Michelangelo, everything. They knew exactly what they were doing, and when they invested in them, you know, you saw bigger budget stuff, and it was fantastic. And when the budget wasn't there, they developed. And I don't know this is the proper term, of course, but they developed what I call expressionism. In that sense, or impressionism, super quickly.
Yeah, like they got very stylized.
Yeah, but really quickly. Like they figured out how to show emotion and how to tell things, and that's where some of the stuff, like the kind of like cuts and it kind of slashes through, like they are still shots. Like they figured out how to convey things really, really, really quickly and really cheaply, and then those people morphed those things as they became fans, and I'm not going to go into it, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, see, and then on the flip side of that is if you look at, American and or Western animation, and even people that are held up like on a pedestal like Ralph Bakshi, who did Lord of the Rings and Fire
Yeah.
and Ice, and
Rotoscope.
and even Disney, things like Disney. If you
Mm-hmm.
look, Snow White and all these movies that Disney made, they did rotoscoping. They just
Yep.
filmed live action actors and animated on top of it. I mean, not that that doesn't work, but it's also cheap,
Mm-hmm.
and like it's cheating. Like, and when you look at how even when they work from live action, it doesn't look as good as what is produced in those
Mm-hmm.
even anime from the 60s and 70s.
Oh yeah.
Even old stuff like Astro Boy and Speed Racer.
Mm-hmm. They just knew they knew how to not waste time and space, and they knew how to
Mm,
make. I don't know. It's like they understood the human eye and human perception better. Like they just knew how things looked good. I don't know a
mm,
better way to say it than that. It's like I love it. Like but like 70 was it the 70s? Robin Hood by Disney. Like
mm-hmm.
it's not great animation. And
No,
even like I'll tell
most
you,
of those movies are not.
yeah, but some of them are noticeably bad. Like the 101 Dalmatians is bad. Like
Mm-hmm.
it is not. I mean, I liked the movie as a kid, but I mean the animation quality is really bad. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what year that was. I can look it up, but I mean, of course you got to compare it to, the Japanese Disney, which is Studio Ghibli, and how from day
Mm-hmm.
one their stuff was top notch, and their colors were even better. I think that's a huge. I mean, I'm not trying to gush all over it technically, but Japan understands colors very well. Like anime, they understand it better than American animators do. To this day, they still do.
Yeah, and then the other side of what for me made anime so much more compelling than American animation and even American live action is the maturity in the storytelling. When I say maturity, I don't just mean violence or sex.
Yeah,
Mature adult content, although that did that was in there. A lot
some
of
of
times,
it, yeah.
sometimes like I remember watching like Ninja Scroll, and it was an R-rated movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was animated, but it was an R-rated movie, and that was a part of the deal. And yeah, shows like even like Dragon Ball Z and stuff were probably more violent than American shows at the time, American cartoons. But what stood out to me, and the best possible example of this is Robotech for me. The first season of Robotech was based on an anime from Japan called Macross, and in that series, you had your main character was Rick. He was a young hotshot pilot. He doesn't really seem like he doesn't have anybody in his life. Like he's kind of an orphan character. His only family is a mentor figure named Roy, who's a fighter pilot, and Roy is not his flesh and blood family, but he calls him Big Brother the whole series. Like he refers to him as Big Brother. And about midway through that series, Roy is in a fight, like a dog fight up in space. He gets wounded and doesn't let anybody know, and comes back to his apartment that he shares with his girlfriend, who is a black woman named Claudia, which in itself was
Especially for Japan.
groundbreaking in the 80s because they didn't even make a big deal out of it. It just
Yeah,
was.
but especially for Japan.
And yeah.
Yeah,
And well, I mean, that was even a big deal here.
I know,
to
but I'm
see
saying
that.
especially for
But yeah,
them.
especially there. But then Roy just dies on the couch, and and Rick has to deal with like the fallout of like my only like mentor, family, father figure person just died, and they didn't just like pretend it had not happened by the next episode. Like he deals with it the whole rest of the series.
Yeah,
And Japanese cartoons, like even things like Voltron, which were more episodic, there was still serialized storytelling.
yeah,
And by the time you and I like were watching shows like Trigun and Cowboy Bebop or Evangelion when it came on Toonami or even on Adult Swim at night, like those shows were serialized. Like you would watch something that connected to the next episode, the next step. There were arcs that would follow a whole season or even a whole series. And American stuff was never like American cartoons were never that
until like
That's
X-Men
you know,
and Batman, that kind of stuff in the 90s.
well, even those shows were not nearly on the level
Yeah.
that
Oh no.
a show like Evangelion is.
Yeah,
You might
and
get a two-parter.
yeah, I'm not trying to split hairs, but the difference is because manga is different. Because like
Oh yeah.
adapting from comics, adapting from that. So I'm not trying to put that out because that is important, but I'm trying to stick to like the medium we're talking about. So
Hmm.
yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think the key reasons for that is because of their adaptation, what they were adapted from, and
Yeah.
that speaks to a cultural difference. And here's what I'm saying, like getting into so that's the technical part. The story stuff, you touched on some of that too. Yeah, anime's never been afraid. Like Japan grabbed onto it, and they saw it as an objective medium.
Hmm.
They didn't see it for children. They just said
Right.
this
What
is like
just
film.
felt-
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it was
yeah. Well,
much piece of.
France did
Uh,
some of that too, especially in comics. Like France
mm,
and other countries immediately saw comics and like animation as like different than America
mhm.
did. And I think it's because America animation didn't begin with it, but the perception of it was built by Disney almost single handedly. Like
Disney and Warner Brothers.
yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. Walt Disney stuff was fantastic, but Walt Disney was for children, and he
Hmm.
specifically, at least at one point, that was what he wanted to build off of. And Astro Boy, of course, came from Mickey Mouse. It's the same design, but as we just said, like they saw it as an objective medium, and that the people like us that grew up on it, you know, to me it was it was a little culture shock at first. The first time you see, because I didn't really see anime until I think I saw Dragon Ball Z at 13, and that was a weird shock. But then Toonami was playing stuff at like 2 in the morning, like Trigun, so that was super violent in some ways. Well, Trigun's not that, you know what I mean, though. And it was kind of a shock, but you get into it and you quickly, at least when you're younger, see that. And like now, 20 years from now, or from that, people that are 20 grew up on it just as an
Hmm.
objective medium.
Hmm.
That's the big difference. The big difference is they saw it, but then I guess here's the thing: is it's an objective medium, but it is a hyper stylization. It's a hyper stylized medium, particularly anime. That's the thing we could get into. Is not all anime is hyper stylized. In fact, some of the original wasn't, and some of the most
Hmm.
popular isn't. But those, it's so easy to become hyper stylized that it often is.
Well, it's such a fluid way of approaching storytelling, so you can get something that, like, there's a recent film, fairly recent film called Weathering with You that's gotten a lot of attention, a lot of awards, and that it's so photorealistic in some places that it almost looks more real than real life.
Yeah,
And then by the same token, you can take something like Devilman Crybaby
yeah,
that is so abstract that it becomes completely surrealism.
yeah. And it's the same. That's the thing. It's the same medium, and like that's what has it. And maybe it's because it hadn't gotten to like French intellectuals, or unfortunately, I have to say American intellectuals now, to be overanalyzed. And I think there's a whole lot. I'm trying to slow down my thoughts. The reason it's still punk. The reason anime is still punk is because it hasn't become intellectualized yet. Because it
Hmm.
hasn't been overanalyzed to death. And that's awesome for it. I think we should gatekeep it to that, even though it's the most popular like form of media probably on the planet other than music. It has to be kept out of the intelligentsia because they will harness it and they will pervert it and they will destroy it. But worse, they'll divide it into different stuff like that. Like, oh, this is a surrealist anime. This is a whatever. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Once the art school kids get their hands on it, or worse, their professors get their hands on it's over as far as being cool.
Well, and see, I think that we've already saw a decline in the art form itself just by companies like Netflix getting a hold of
Mm-hmm.
it, and then they produce their own that's all CGI garbage instead of actual hand drawn artistry anymore, and
Yeah.
so much of that just looks so empty and soulless. So there's already like if any classic anime gets a remake, the vast majority of the response to it is that it does not look good as the one that was done in the 80s or
Oh,
the
and
90s.
Trigun Stampede looks trash. And even I don't get it. I've seen people try to praise it and they post scenes from it. I'm like, dude, this looks absolutely awful. Like, I'm not trying to be a snob, but it looks terrible.
Yeah,
And
I tried to watch it and
yeah,
couldn't. I didn't get through the first
I couldn't get
part of
into the manga. I'm not trying to rip it, but I completely agree with you on Chainsaw Man too. The anime, to me, it looks terrible.
it. Yeah,
Um,
I just can't. I can't get by how ugly they look.
yeah, and this isn't trying to be a snob because I like stuff. Everything. I mean, FLCL was like a, I hate to say deconstructionist of anime, but it wasn't because you can't really deconstruct anime because it's just animation, it's just drawing. And Evangelion was doing like black and white stick figures, and it works. That's the whole thing. Is like it's such a anime and animation in general, and I'd love to say animation in general because I wish um, American artists would get into that without. Oh, let me slow down. I'm jumping so far. I think it's way too fast for my mouth.
while
It's
you're thinking,
well.
while you're
Let
thinking,
me say this though.
yeah,
It's it is all it is it's someone with pen and paper. That's
mm-hmm.
all it is. It's animation, and wish that American animators would learn from anime without trying to recreate it because we can take some stuff from it and move forward with it without succumbing to it. And I'm not meaning that in a derogatory way. I'm just saying instead of falling into mimicry, we need to progress.
And see, I would say that like one of the only examples of that I've ever seen was Aeon Flux back in the 90s on MTV.
That and well, I would push back on that and say Avatar: The Last Airbender, because it clearly took a ton from anime. Like
Was that not a Japanese company that animated that show though?
I could be wrong. Maybe I am. Let me look it up because I thought it was American because it's still very
I know it
American
aired all,
looking.
but I could have sworn that it was
Well, I could be
the
wrong
studio.
then.
I mean, I could be wrong too. I mean, I am an idiot.
Me too.
But see, like, I think one of the best engagement with anime that I've ever seen on an American end was Quentin Tarantino using anime for like that segment in Kill Bill.
It's an yeah, I agree with that. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to. It says it was produced by Nickelodeon Animation Studios, but I don't know if that was done, stateside or not. Animators JM Animation, which that sounds probably like Japanese animation, just based on the name. Um, I'm trying to find JM Mal Animation or MOI Animation did 10 episodes. Um, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to go off on a tangent here, guys.
Avatar: Last Airbender definitely it had a lot of the influence visually.
South Korean studios.
Okay,
Okay, so
I knew it.
that's not
I knew it
Japan,
was.
but it is
Yeah, I knew it
Asian.
wasn't American. It wasn't an
Okay.
American
Well,
studio.
I stand corrected on that, but I guess what I should say is it had a American type storytelling in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
it had much
Yeah,
more Western storytelling.
yeah. Okay, let's go with that. Yeah,
But
I think that's a good hybrid, is what I'm saying.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. But there's very few others, things that have been produced animated from America that I think even can stand beside something like Akira that's an absolute
Oh
masterpiece.
yeah, I mean Akira is an almost untouchable piece of artwork. It's unbelievably technically proficiently amazing. The manga and the anime.
And see, so like when it comes to why we appreciate it so much,
Yeah.
when you look at like the people that would, you know, throw shade at anime and say, "Oh, it's just a bunch of silly, pervy stuff." For one thing, they haven't watched it
Yeah.
and they don't know. You're critiquing something you haven't watched. And but for another thing, like show me anything on a television show produced by America that comes close to pushing the emotional buttons that some of the greatest
and
ever
even
pick up.
philosophical, and psychological, religious, and just in intelligence in general, as far as like a quality of thought.
The only American show that I have seen in my entire life that even comes close to making me feel the way the best top tier anime makes me feel is the first season of True Detective.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, 100%.
But like 99% of all the shows that win awards that everybody's obsessed with, that everybody loves,
Mm-hmm.
don't have even a fraction of the character development
No.
and stakes, like actual stakes and emotional stakes, and like you said, deep philosophical questions and stuff. That and every time they try to do it, they fumble it, and they're so awkward with it,
Yeah.
or so unsubtle with it.
Yeah,
And anime just does it effortlessly, or makes it look effortless.
yeah, and like we said, it can do it in a number of ways. It can do it. I mean, literally like Evangelion or FLCL, and I know that those are kind of the same company or partial to each other, but it showed that you could do it with technical proficiency, like some of those fight scenes, and you can do it with a white blank paper and some scrawlings. It
Mm-hmm.
literally, because like I said, you just see it as an objective format medium. It's like if I can just use ink to tell the story, and I can change the ink halfway through, and I can do it, and it's something. Of course, you can't do that. Of course, real life actors have limitations. Now, I mean, I will say this. Like a real life, there are some performances that I would say can demolish even the most top tier of anime as far as an emotional and every um, thing we just mentioned before, every category. It's hard in some movies they can live action movies, you
Oh,
know.
yeah, of course.
But yeah, I'm with you. TV shows. I mean, I can't. Why would a kid? Why would a 12-year-old watch TV when they have anime? Why would? I mean, I stopped. I mean, the second I get like a computer that could get on like 123anime.com or whatever, and I knew what anime was, I'm not gonna. Why would I watch? Anything on TV like Law and Order?
Exactly.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I agree.
I think a lot of it is I don't know because a lot of it's one to one. Now getting into those differences, um, manga to anime is like a 1 to 2 or whatever step. 2D to 2D moving, whereas a novel, which is just prose, to a show or a movie, that's a much bigger leap, and that's where
Mm-hmm.
problems arise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's not to say it's not good to do. It's obviously if you pull it off, it's a harder task. I will give a live action shows in America that's a harder task to do unless you're
Mm-hmm.
Stanley Kubrick, and then you make it better. But
You
yeah,
know, yeah, the reason that we care about it is not just, oh well, we're fanboys of it, because, which I mean, we definitely are,
because it's good. I mean,
but
it's not that we like it because we're fans. We became fans because we like it.
yeah, it's objectively good, and it has it the challenge that anime presents for me is my my personal, like, watermark, my personal, the goal that I aim for is to create something that somebody will watch or read or interact with, that will make them feel the way I felt the first time I saw the Guyver,
Yeah,
or the first time I saw that first angel in the beginning of Evangelion, and
yeah.
thought, oh my gosh, I've never seen anything as cool and terrifying as
And
this.
from the start of that show, I'm not gonna go off on a tangent on Evangelion because we could do that all day. But from the start, I remember watching it at my friend's house, like on a Sunday afternoon, that he had like on a USB drive on his crappy computer. That it was like however many like pixels. It was just terrible looking. But from the second it started, it was like bam, it hit me. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
this feels like the end of the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's a perfect segue into like Apollyon 20XX.
Mm-hmm.
We have made that, not that we're aping any specific series. We're not trying to copy
No.
anything. I don't think you're going to look at our book and see anything in it that you're going to point at and say, well, hey, that just looks like he copied so and so.
Mm-hmm.
But that apocalyptic feel and that dread and that end of the world feeling,
Mm-hmm.
man, that's what we're trying to accomplish,
Yeah.
is to give it that. It's very much a Western story.
Yeah.
It's not an anime.
No, and
It's
it's not
not a
trying. And
manga.
it's not trying to be either.
It's not trying to be, but the tone.
The spirit.
I think that's, yeah, the spirit of it, the tone of it, the stakes, the way we get inside our characters' heads and hearts.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of stuff is genuinely way more influenced by Japanese anime than it is by anything.
And the novel, which hey guys, we're putting out a novel soon. It's done. It's been done for like 3 years. I think we mentioned the last one, but it's called the Shaper, the Shifter, the Shadow, and it's part of the Black Star 6-book saga. It'll be 6 or 7 books. I don't know yet. The ending is written, so I don't have to worry about that. Like we're George R. Martin, but George R. Martin. But when I started it and like finished it and edited it, the whole thing was I want this to feel like an anime. Like I want everything to in my head. That's how I see it. Whenever I'm reading it and writing, I'm like, how would this look and feel and act? And not to toot our own horns, but this is the challenge we've taken upon ourselves that I wish people would. Is so many people have tried to take. They've tried to get at the soul of anime, and they think by using tropes and by using animation style, that's how you do it. It's like, no, that is the expression of it. You have to go back to what is inside of it, and they'll do that. Like it's something, because that's the easy stuff. I mean, it's like when someone wants to be in a punk band, they rip off some Blink 182 chords, or they do like a Taking Back Sunday call and response. And I know that's pop punk, but hey, internet, you guys made pop punk the #1 punk in the world, so you can deal with it. Instead of doing something like Danzig did, which, you know, leaving the Misfits and kind of sounding like Elvis, kind of sounding like the Doors, kind of sounding like Sabbath. You know, it was more punk than the Misfits were after him, I think, and it was more punk than most punk is.
That gritty black and white video and
and bare bones guitar, fantastic guitar player. I forget that guy's name, the big buff dude, fantastic.
John Christ.
Fantastic guitar player. But yeah, it's the idea, it's the spirit, and it's the guys that understand that usually are ahead and trying and maybe even failing, but trying to construct something new from that spirit instead of taking the husk and moving
the greatest
forward.
Thing that could ever happen, the greatest thing that could ever happen would be for some studio or company in Japan to read the book or read the comic and say, this is so anime that we're going to do a Japanese adaptation of it.
Yeah. That's of course that's a dream.
Like that's the dream come true, would be to have a Western fan make their version of what we've done.
Yeah, and using the, you use the style to convey the spirit and the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But it's no different than anything else. I mean, it's no different from like people who try to do. I mean, and even Japanese animators, Japanese manga artists do the same thing. They try to make something and they know the style very well, but they don't have the spirit. They don't have the soul behind it. I mean, most anime, most manga, like everything else, like every art form, like most comics, most books, most music, it's not good. It or at least it's not up to par. And I think that's a whole other tangent I don't want to get off on, but I could. But that's my thing. What I noticed very early on with music as a musician is like I know these guys that are good musicians, but they're not artists. I know dudes. I know dudes.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, you can be a wonderful musician, but don't try to be something you're not.
Yeah, I've worked with people that are incredibly technically proficient guitar players, but they can't write a song.
Yeah, and the problem is they're trying to do that.
Yep.
Yeah, and you've got some guys that are, they're songwriters and they can't play a solo, and then they try to. It gets really bad. You have to know your strengths, or you have to know your weaknesses. You have to know your weaknesses, and you work on them, but you keep those back, and you go
Yeah,
with
you
your
stay in your
strengths.
lane.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
you stay in your lane.
until you carve a new lane, and that's possible to do.
Mhm.
It's just really
Yeah.
hard, and that's the thing. You know, with this is we're trying to capture the spirit of the things we saw. We liked them because they were good stories, not just the way they
Mhm.
looked. Because again, there's things that look great that I don't care about. I'd rather watch something that is less technically proficient, that is better, that's a better story than vice versa.
Mhm. I'll put it this way: no medium has ever made me cry as much as an anime has.
Yeah, it's never made you feel as much, and part of that is the hyper stylization of it. Um,
Yep.
and then the other part is that they're just so there's a good story, and they found a wonderful way to tell it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
And they're
yeah,
patient with their story, but they also, they also don't milk something for a billion years when it's if it's something that has an ending, it usually like it ends.
yeah,
They're okay with endings, and they're
yeah.
they're okay with being patient.
Well, and if I had to go into it, um, what's funny is I just read this Miyazaki. One of his contemplations was like basically Shintoism, even though he's not a Buddhist or a Shinto belief, versus Christianity, because he said the first Christian art he saw was Herodias Bosch, like his portraits of
Mm.
hell, and like crucifixion and stuff, and he was like, man, this is really grotesque. Like, how could you look at this versus like more Buddhist art, which he saw as peaceful and beautiful and all that stuff. And of course, I mean, if we had to go into theology, he's missing like 17 million things. He's missing 2 to 5,000 years of theology there, and the beauty within it. I'm not ripping him. I'm not gonna rip Hayao Miyazaki on art, but he made a good point though. Is like that more Japanese style thing, and that, I guess that more Buddhist view of like seeing things and seeking beauty has been lost, but it wasn't because of Christianity. That's where he's wrong. It was lost because the West abandoned Christianity. Because when the West had Christianity, look at the paintings we made, look at the buildings that we made, look at, you know what I mean? And I'm not, even as a Christian, I'm not trying to put it on a pedestal, because I mean, look at Islam before it became kind of what it is now. Wonderful buildings, wonderful paintings. The guys basically invented modern algebra.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop talking now, but you see what I'm saying? Like,
Oh yeah.
I think the major problem is the average person is living so superficially as a husk too. They're trying to put on everything in every sense to try to express that meaning, but they don't have meaning inside.
Hmm. Doing some heavy words, Paul Blart.
But
Well, to bring that around to the initial
yeah,
topic, though, you look at somebody who can make these quick, judgment calls about a whole vast sea of art and say, well, it's all silly, it's all just
a waste, all
lowest
perverted.
common denominator. Yeah, I mean that's genuinely just ignorance.
Yeah,
And like you said earlier, these are people who would rather criticize something they haven't seen than create something themselves. They're not capable of creating.
if you can, if you can generalize something like that, you either understand it so well that you see it for what it is, or you know nothing about it. It really is like that IQ meme that like starts here and
Hmm.
like some guy being like, I like bananas, and then up here it's like the mid level intelligence is like a thesis on bananas, and over here it's like some guy like a sage going, I like bananas, or whatever. Like they have the same end
They have the
result.
same view. Yeah,
Yeah, the same view.
that's
Like,
awesome.
yeah,
I love that. I like anime.
exactly. Anime's cool, and then anime's cool. And in the middle, it's here's a dissertation on why it's pervy or bad or whatever. Or like, hey, hey, it's all pervy. Here's a thing, and then hey, it's all pervy. Because
Why do they have to
yeah.
be tentacles and everything?
Oh yeah, Well, I'm sure there are guys over there, like I said, Miyazaki, of course, was one that was completely outspoken on that kind of stuff.
Oh
Um,
yeah, he hated it. Hated the cheesecake fan service
yeah,
whenever it did show up.
and what's his name? Ano from
Yeah,
Evangelion.
Hideaki.
When he does it, it's to make you feel something other than that. It's to show those themes in a lot of ways in repression, in longing, usually not lust, but and to show the impact of it. If you want,
Hmm.
and I hate to use it because it's not a deconstruction. Evangelion is not a deconstruction. It's just a new frontier is what it is.
Hmm.
But if you want something that totally takes I wish guys who said this that anime's all perfect would watch Evangelion and really watch it, because what he does is show you some of those things, and it's not to deconstruct; it's to not hyper realize it. It's to like
Hmm.
you see what I'm saying? It's to be like here. Now, how does it affect this kid growing up?
Hmm.
And to tie it all together, to say like this is like how this world is. This is how, especially like a young boy's life is and his perception. And how do you deal with that? How do you
Hmm.
find a healthy way to deal with that? And of course, Shinji doesn't. Maybe well until the very end.
Hmm.
Anyway, to get back, um, like I said, I don't want to over intellectualize things.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's in everything I do musically, everything I do, I think like what is the most anime way to do that? And like I said, I think most people they think that too, but then of course they go to the tropes, which
Hmm.
only proves guys like we're talking about correct. And that's huge.
Well, and
That's
see,
huge
like,
in indie comics. There's a ton of guys that are out there drawing pseudo anime just for cheesecake.
hmm, yep, and that stuff, it's successful to whatever degree it's successful, but that stuff is not going to have a legacy.
No, no,
Nobody's going to be talking about it in 20 years.
no, and that's what's so funny is you take something like that and you're just like, y y where's the substance, man? Like, cause you can
It's
have
low
that.
hanging
Yeah,
fruit.
you can have that. You can have that. Like you said, Ninja Scroll had some of that, and some top tier anime does have some of that. But it's done in a well constructed way, and usually 99% done as a joke,
Hmm.
and that's just a different culture. It's that I think that's what you have to come down to is that Japan and America are just and the West in general are just two different cultures.
Hmm.
But the fact that I can't 100% articulate the feeling that we're trying to capture, like when you just literally have to say, what's the most anime way to do this? We know what it doesn't mean. We know it
Hmm.
doesn't mean like the tropes. But the fact that you can't articulate it, that's the nature of art. And that's what an old podcast that Steven and I did about what is art, it's trying, it should be to express the unexpressible. If you
It's
can't put it in a box, that's what makes it good when you finally do get a box outline of it.
that's the thing. It's that whole idea of I can't tell you what it is, but I
Hmm.
know it when I see it. I know it when I feel it. I
That's,
can't describe it.
isn't that how the Supreme Court described porn? And and you just totally defeated this entire argument. Josh destroys his entire argument in like a sentence. Well, good night, everybody.
Breathe, Dan. Breathe.
You just did it. You just literally. Hey, Josh, I don't know which side of the meme you're on.
I like anime. That's what side I'm on.
I know it when I see it. I know it when I see it. Anyway, yeah, I think what made it, why it latched on to me so much was, and going back to 2 points, I think because it wasn't over intellectualized, and it's punk rock, so that's two, and three, because of those things, or more importantly, because of this, because it's so hard to pin down and put into that first format, it is punk rock. So it's still in this shaky, it's still so chaotic and wild that you can draw from it and build around it. Because once it's tame, and once it's tame, it's just, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
Once it's pop punk, who cares?
Yep.
And I don't know, like it could go on forever and not become that, because it literally is
Yep.
just an objective medium. Um,
Yep.
but I don't know. I don't know if it will, because film didn't. Film's a little bit older than anime, technically. I know, not drawing and not moving pictures, like a horse running or whatever. But the idea of film and the intellectualization of film, I think that's it. I mean, I'm not trying to get too philosophical here, but like, like the right brain and left brain, like Rush, like chaos and order. And when something is too ordered, you can't work with it anymore. Like once it's set, like once clay has dried and set, you can't work with it anymore. And the way that
Mm-hmm.
happens with ideas and art is that it becomes intellectualized. I think that's it. I
Yep.
think if I had to come up with a thesis for this, for why anime is cool, which are still cool, it's because it hasn't become, at least in America, over intellectualized yet, which is crazy because America now has a tendency to do that with everything.
Mm-hmm. Well,
It's still somewhat sacred,
yeah.
and by sacred, of course, I mean set apart.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we hope that if you are a person who has watched and interacted with anime, and you know what we're talking about, the type of tone and storytelling we're talking about. Man, that's our goal with everything we're creating. Like Dan said, is how can we make this more anime? How would anime do this? What's the best, most anime way to do this? Like, subscribe, follow us on socials. Go to godfouniverse.com and join our mailing list. Uh, the comic book, the graphic novel Apollyon 20XX is coming out uh, in a couple of months. I'm very close to finished with the
Mm-hmm.
art side of it, and then it'll be a matter of going through, editing it, and getting it ready to publish. And those announcements about pre-ordering that and all will be coming near future.
And we're gonna just have a lot going on. It's either gonna be a Patreon or a Substack. I haven't made up my mind yet, but we're gonna have in-world podcasts, which are like kind of a horror podcast that takes place in the universe itself of Apollyon 20XX. We've got a book club we're doing, which we've got so much, guys. I can't even tell you. So many things we're trying to build here and trying to have ready as a level 1 foundation, that I think when it's there, which it should be soon when this comes, people are going to look back at this kind of stuff and be like, man, there's no way they knew all this stuff was being built, but it is. So hang in with us, and we're going to be expanding very soon. And if you have any thoughts, please leave them in the comments, and we'd love to have you on here. And this is us signing off until next time. Peace.